Please welcome, we have the names back here, Alyosha. Okay, thank you. Okay, so you probably introduce yourself the best ways, and yeah, do you need my mic? All right.
I normally don't need a mic. My voice is quite clear. Is it okay? I do need a mic. All right. Okay, perfect. I think the way we will introduce ourselves, Jan Joost will kick off the presentation. He will introduce himself and introduce BlockLab. Then I will introduce myself, and then we will present two cases that actually run on exactly the same infrastructure and solution. When we started working on it, we really didn't realize that what we had developed was basically a Swiss Army knife for supply chains, or to digitize supply chains. So without further ado, Jan Joost.
Thanks. I thought I was going to warm up for you. Hi, Jan Joost, one of the directors of BlockLab, together with Alyosha and our third director, who is literally in negotiations in Rotterdam as we speak, but he would have liked to be here. Thank you for having us. Personally, I really enjoy that it's in Berlin, although it makes me feel old. I was just mesmerizing, and my first time was 25 years ago. Love Parade, hitchhiking, squat houses, completely different era. But throughout the years, there's a history, including first EWF event, where I pitched one of our ideas that I think I then promised will be running in a year, but it is a running venture now. So a couple of years delay, but we managed. We are the founders and two of the three directors of BlockLab, based in Rotterdam, backed by the Port of Rotterdam. We are a lab as well as an incubator. So what we do is we try out new things in new partnerships, experiment with technology, start with a business scope, see how far we can get. And if we think we're onto something, we try and spin that out so that the lab can stay a lab and a venture can be a venture. We have the luxury that we have a good team for that, so we're close to 30 people now, well-backed, well-facilitated, so it's running pretty smooth. And mission-driven. So when we started, and what we still do, is we focus on transforming global supply chains and enhancing the energy transition. The reason we're together now is that that's the scope of today, I think, the supply chains in the energy transition. So it was a long-time dream to work projects together. We run the business together, but finally we are in projects together. I think that's, as a background, perhaps that's enough. We're in the game for 5 years now. We have a couple of ventures that are really up and running, serving parties, working. This is the one I was bragging about 4 or 5 years ago. It's live now, and you'll meet this one during the presentation. Our role so far has been, I do energy, Alyosha does supply chains, and because that's way more of a focus today, I think I'll step aside and only be back at the end of the show again, but thanks.
I promised I would introduce myself as well. Alyosha Beijen, I'm CTO of BlockLab and a colleague of Jan Joost. Next to that, I'm also a researcher at the Hogeschool Windesheim. Second to that, I'm a visiting lecturer at the Marshall School of Business of the University of Southern California. And with two professors from the USC, I co-authored a book on blockchain and supply chain management. It's now in its second edition. It even got translated into Chinese, or Mandarin, to be more exact. I never had a chance to read it because I really don't understand. It's all Greek to me, Chinese. So, so my interest is on one side building solutions, solving supply chain issues, and you see a number of them over there. And one of those issues is das Lieferkettensorgfaltspflichtengesetz. There are people who can say it without looking at the slide. I can't. It's my second most favorite German word. The most favorite German word is Eisenbahnnotenpunkt Hin- und Herschieber. And I like it because I like to play with trains when I was a kid. So when we started as a lab, we started quite small. We started exploring and tinkering, trying to find things that stick and where blockchain really made sense as a technology. And over the years, over the last 5 years, that culminated into I would say, a stack of solutions. Not necessarily all blockchain, but a toolkit, a Swiss Army knife that allows you to develop all kinds of applications for supply chain. The first one is a infrastructure. Jan Joost already mentioned Naviporta, which is basically that infrastructure. It's a blockchain as a service run by ports. I will go into a little bit more detail on what it is later on and the individual components. Then on top of that, you have all kinds of services that you need in order to notarize documents, for example, or to transfer ownership of a token, for example. And then on top of that, you have applications. And we will talk about these applications in a little bit more detail. But before that, I will quickly go through the whole stack. Naviporta as a service, is a blockchain as a service. And that contains an identity provider, a blockchain network, obviously. A way to store data in a distributed and decentralized way. And what we call a shipment registry, which facilitates looking and finding the right assets that are linked to a certain shipment in this particular case. So then on top of that, we deploy smart contracts. Notary, in general, we call them notary contracts, so they take care of the digital transfer of ownership of a token, for example, but also the notarization of a document, providing proof of existence. That's what we use a notary for. And also data-related services. Why do we... and you need these services in order to be able to build applications on top of that. We worked on a number we developed a number of these solutions. And the one I'm going to talk right now is about risk finance optimization. So it's about how can I make assessments on the risk of commodities or the risks associated with financing commodities, and in particular commodities coming out of countries such as Colombia or in Africa, where a lot of sustainable commodities are grown, but how do you make sure that these farmers get a right price with, if you look at that supply chain that has a lot of middlemen and a lot of intransparency associated with it. I'm a senior researcher at the lectorate of supply chain finance, so I did a lot of research on how do you set up the right risk models for that, and what kind of data do you need in order to run these risk models, and also not only in particular the data, but what kind of relationships are you looking for in data to give to make risk assessment of commodity financing more accurate. We did that together with a company called Anona. They are a company that does the portfolio risk management for funds that want to invest in sustainable commodity growing or farmers, for example. It's called ODF. which is a fund that is specifically targeting funding of farmers in Africa and Latin America that grow sustainable commodities like coffee or soya. And the problem that they have is that getting finance for them is extremely expensive. There's also a lot of intermediaries in between. And because the overall visibility and the risks that are associated with the financing of these kind of transactions, a lot of money ends up in different pockets than where they actually belong, and that is really with the farmers. And the Asian Development Bank actually did research into how big is this problem, and this problem is estimated to be about 10% of global trade, and that's about $2 trillion US. $2 trillion US of transactions don't take place because buyer and seller cannot agree on the financing conditions that exist. And if you can combine all kinds of data related to a product, and you're able to capture that data through a token, so a digital twin, then when that token is moved through the supply chain, you can continuously add all kinds of assets to it, but you can also assign, for example, transfer of ownership to it. And by making that possible, there's a much more accurate way of knowing whether your product is, but also to assess the risks associated with it. So, of course, the most important thing is lowering the financing cost, and that is by allowing better visibility of where is my commodity, how has it been grown, what kind of tests have happened to it. And you have to do that in a way that is, on the one hand, provides you information and proof about it, but at the same time, there's a lot of confidential information that you have to hide. And that is where, on the one hand, the blockchain part comes in, and on the other hand, there's also a need for data services that are associated with it. So the solution really is a combination of a number of smart contracts that help in modeling a supply chain, and it can be any supply chain. Jan Joost will show that later. His use case is about the hydrogen supply chain, but we actually use exactly the same contracts that we use to model the coffee commodity supply chain. So each batch that gets generated gets its own digital twin. We also have special contracts that allow to combine and split those batches. And that's something that is really very common in a supply chain. You put things together, you split them apart. And at the same time, there are various entities within the supply chain that continuously add all kinds of assets and data to these tokens. And as I mentioned earlier, my research primarily focuses on not on data per se, but on the relationships between data. Because if I can fake one thing, and that has happened a lot in supply chains, if I fake a document, then I might get access to the goods, and I can claim these goods. If I make an agreement with somebody else and do a handshake and agree on a transaction, well, I can still fake that transaction, but that requires already two people in that transaction. But if I, for example, agree on a transaction and have a third party, like a trucking company, stating that the goods have arrived, then all that proof together, the more proof you have, the higher the certainty is that that transaction actually took place. This is not an academic thing. A couple of years ago in China, there's been a fraud with copper trade, and $7 billion US dollars of copper disappeared just by faking documents. So it's this issue of creating and falsifying evidence is something that is very common. We're now doing the first pilots in both Colombia and in Togo. I want to give the word now to Jan Joost, who will explain more or less the same, but for a different commodity.
Yeah, so thanks a lot. So I can keep it brief. Yeah, a little bit about hydrogen trade. An important remark is it's not happening that much so far. So it's a new expected market where you see large investments and where stakes are high, but it's not up and running completely. So it's not a shortcut to large business cases, but it is a highly important new market. As Europe expects, Germany expects, the Netherlands expects, that they need net import of green energy, and they will. Hydrogen is one of the interesting carriers, can be ammonia, etc. But it's expected to be a quite important commodity in the green energy economy. And asked by the port, working together with High Exchange, is a Dutch initiative on setting the market standards for hydrogen, with Expert Center on Commodity Trading, now with the European Commission, Hydrogen Council, etc. So in an ecosystem environment, we are setting up the first infrastructure to guide that a hydrogen supply chain. So what's happening there is we want hydrogen to be green in the future, so produced by solar power, wind power. We want to prove that it was generated on green energy, that transportation, conversion, and anything that happens until it arrives in Europe has been as green as possible, and we want to be able to track and trace that properly. And although we're now quite embedded in, let's say, what's happening institutionally, we're scoping and proving the product from let's say, the commercial angle. If you sell hydrogen into a new country, prices will most probably be better if you can prove how green it is. So there is a commercial incentive to keep your accounting and your preparations for certification, due diligence, etc., as on point as possible. So that's where we could use actually most of the stack already available, some additions, especially on the application level, but where, in contrary to that first venture I mentioned where we had a couple of years delay, this is something where we can make fast moves because of that existing stack. So what we're now proving is this immutable registry. I think you've heard enough about that. More focus on the validation and the auditing roles that are in such a supply chain. So we have been discussing with coffee beans, if you claim I roasted them, the next guy will, yeah, that's roasted. But if you claim I didn't generate any carbon in my step, it's a bit harder for the next guy to validate what you've been doing. So there's more. We're putting more focus on the validation, the roles, the privileges that come with that. And we help a owner, a selling party, a trader to be on point real time. What's my carbon scores? What's the state of my batch? Where is it, etc. And ready to apply for certification as soon as it kicks in. There are some challenges. For instance, certification rules are not being written yet. I spoke with the guy who's writing them last week. He's not done, he told me. But still the accounting goes. If we change the rules here, you'll have to prove something else, but the way of accounting and of validating will hold. So what we're preparing is to work with both the industry players and the institutions in growing the further scope and rollout of such a solution. Yeah, I think I can't go through the steps, but you can imagine. You create hydrogen, you convert, you have handlers down your supply chain that you need to give roles, you need to keep track of what they claim, what documents they come with, etc. And we support you to keep validating that continuously. Like I said, we're now in the stage of we have the right consortium, show that this is real and that we can grow this. So this will be a bit faster than the other one. We will be back with news early next year, I think. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan-Joost and Alasha. Do we have any questions to them? I think we have time for, one. Let's start.
So the market for green hydrogen is still to be formed. We're still struggling with grey or blue hydrogen. How do you expect the product to have an uptake if the market is still forming?
We're working with the forming market, so we are taking the bet that it will grow and that upside will be there, but growing with it. And interesting direction we're discussing with some trading experts is ammonia, which is a market. There are some rules about ammonia tracking, and there are some GVO rules in the Netherlands. If you combine it, you have a starting point. So it's, yes, there is some gamble that this will actually happen, but I think you've read the same news on investments being made, reports, etc. So it's working with them. No.
Okay, I think we have time for another question. I think you were the second, and maybe we have a third. No? Yes? Okay.
Hey, can you tell a little bit about the consortium? Who's already participating?
Some yes, some no. So I think I mentioned, and I think that's for this context the most appropriate and best fit. Some institutional parties that connected with the union database. How is that going to work? The port, high exchange. Some parties in the realm of certification. So that's the first circle we have, and some industry players with interest in that. But that's not the right timing, let me put it like that. Yeah.
Thank you, very interesting, thanks so much. It's more like a follow-up of the first question, basically, and on green hydrogen again. We are now, of course, we're saying we need to form the market of the hydrogen, whether this is blue, green, whatever color it is. But there's also a role of regulatory framework, right? So the EU is struggling a lot. There are two big proposals now in the pipeline. Do you think that good regulations is actually something that enables or even can be considered as a blocker of developing the hydrogen deployment processes? Do we need it, or it can even prove worse?
Yeah. Well, perhaps two answers. So one thing is I think I'm with some people who think H2 is a molecule and that's a commodity, and where it comes from and the carbon is something else. So you should, in the end, think of it as two markets. So you'll spend your money more efficient in saving carbon. Why via H2 if you can do it somewhere else? So I think conceptually I'm with them. I think what's happening around the EU regulations, as far as I got it, is the idea was to be pretty hardcore on sustainability requirements, so additional real-time use of new green energy in production. Thanks to the shite in Russia and Ukraine, the parliament pushed for let's not be that tough on the rules, anything we can get. And there were some industry players who pushed back and please give us those standards so that we have something to relate to. So that I think there's also from the market there's a push to give us those standards. Then we have a framework to work with.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. Two questions. I assume I know the answer, but why you're using technical twins? First of all, and the other question is, you use a mixture of coins as well as smart contracts, right? And why so complicated?
Well, perhaps you should chip into this as the most technical of the two. Why I want to work with digital twins, you can do more with it than with the real stuff. It's hard to to do a digital transaction of a can full of hydrogen, and you can have automated, smart, data-driven events taking place if you have a digital asset. So it's you can do much more. It's as simple as that, actually.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, the most important reason is to be able to combine the physical and the financial flows within a supply chain in a meaningful way. And then you need objects that can handle complex ownership constructs. You need to be able to make distinctions between an owner and a beneficiary. For us, the most logical way of handling that is through tokenization and creating a digital twin of that particular product, and also creating a digital twin of the associated processes of splitting and bringing together these different products. It offers also the opportunity to, at the end of the supply chain, to really then start the decomposition again of a token and see how you can, for example, use these products again in a circular economy. So we think that tokenization, in order to be able to handle the financial and the physical flow together, is, I wouldn't say the only way, but the way we think is the most efficient and the best possible way. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much to both of you, and maybe some hands for them again.
Thank you.